recent decades, the Islamic financial service business has experienced remarkable growth. On a global scale, financial institutions have encountered a dynamic, fast-paced, and competitive environment. Sharia banking, also known as Islamic banking, has been around since the 1970s and has grown rapidly in the previous 30 years. Islamic banking is now practiced all across the world, from the east to the west. In Indonesia, the development of Islamic banking is implemented under a dual banking system in accordance with the Indonesian banking architecture in order to provide a wider banking service alternative to the Indonesian economy.
Next is problem statement. In 2019, COVID-19 was discovered in Wuhan City, China. On 2 March 2020, President Jokowi confirmed the positive case of COVID-19 in Indonesia. As a result of the virus, it gave a negative impression on the country of Indonesia. When the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, it affected many sectors, especially the banking sector. This is because the banking sector is a very important and faster growing sector in the global financial landscape. It will also indirectly increase the strong economic growth in Indonesia. However, Sharia bank faced various problems that will affect its performance and profitability during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the most significant effects can be seen though the financial performance of Islamic banking, which shows slower financing growth. This is due to the increase in the number of job losers. So, following many who lost their job, it has resulted in them not being able to make loan repayment due to the declining cost of living due to the COVID-19 pandemic that occurred. So, Bank Syariah implemented a policy of delaying payment of financing for some customers who experienced a decrease in income for their business.
Research question. There are 3 research questions that we have. Firstly, what is the determinant of Sharia bank financial performance during the COVID-19 pandemic? Secondly, what is the factor of profitability financial performance Sharia bank in Indonesia? Lastly, what is the recommendation of the way to increase Sharia bank profitability?
Next is research objective. In general, the objective is to determine Sharia bank financial performance in Indonesia. In specific, there are 3. The first one is to identify the factor of financial performance Sharia bank Indonesia. Second, to determine the relationship between capital education ratio, operating cost to operating income, financing to deposit ratio, and not performing financing that significantly influenced the financial performance of Sharia bank in Indonesia. And the last one is to propose recommendation to solve the problem that affect financial performance of Sharia bank during COVID-19.
The scope of the study was carried out in Indonesia, which is to determine the factor that influence the profitability of Sharia bank in Indonesia. The study also aims to identify the ways to improve Sharia bank's profitability in Indonesia. The dependent variable is return on assets, while the independent variables are liquidity, bank size, and credit risk. All the data collected from secondary data and time series data, which was obtained from annual report of Sharia bank in Indonesia, include Mudarabah, Istishna, Kafala, and many more. These data are annually basis data from 2011 to 2020, which is 10 years. The method of the research used is ordinary list, a square regression.
For the significance of the study, the purpose of this study is to analyze the determinants of Sharia bank's financial performance in Indonesia. The result will contribute to the knowledge which the researcher can determine the factors that influence the financial performance and also will be able to determine the significance of its profitability. This research is important for policymakers to come up with good response to Sharia bank profitability, to identify ways to increase Sharia bank profitability, and to find the right instrument and tactics to use in banking system.
Limitation of the study. Like in other studies, this particular study also has some unavoidable limitations. Limitations are influences that the researcher cannot control. In other words, they are the shortcomings that cannot be controlled by the research that place restriction on our methodology and conclusion. The first limitation is the sample profile. Many academic studies have used student sampling. There are many advantages for this, such as easy access and low cost for data collection. Nonetheless, using purely student sampling is also extremely limiting if the population of the study is comprised of people with various profiles. The second limitation is access to literature. In the majority cases, studies started when research identified gaps in the literature and tried to address them. However, the identification or understanding that there are gaps depends on the research level of access to the existing literature. What may seem as the research gap might be a huge misconception simply because the person did not have access to a larger range of scientific literature. Thus, access to literature can also be a limitation. The third limitation is the age of data. If the study is based on secondary data, pay extra care to the age of the data. It making the current assumptions based on old data represents a strong limitation.
For literature review, the first one is return on asset, which is ROA. According to Fahmi 2020, the potential for success in the banking system is reflected in its financial statement, which is profitability. If ROA is positive, it indicates if the bank's total asset utilized in operation have the potential to generate profit. If ROA is negative, it indicates that the total asset utilized to run the business are not profitable, which is loss. Second, capital adequacy ratio, CAR. According to Customer 2014, CAR is one of the problems facing banking in the internet sector. Banks should maintain sufficient capital to support risk-taking activities. According to Wicked Sono 2014, when the CAR value is low, then profitability ROA of bank will decrease. Third is non-performing financing, NPF. According to Sharia and Humanita 2009, a financial system instability is defined by the occurrence of three events, one of which was the failure of banking. Meanwhile, according to M. Sabri 2020, ROA has a negative and significant effect on NPF ratio. Next, operating expenses to operating income, BOPO. According to Pandya 2020, BOPO is a comparison between total operating costs with total operating income and used to measure the level of efficiency and the bank's ability to conduct its operating activities. According to Rini and Burhani 2020, BOPO has a positive effect on ROA, but Naha and Prawoto 2017 and also Sitompol and Nasution 2019 argues that BOPO has a negative effect on ROA. Last but not least is financing to deposit ratio, FDR. According to Mundrajat Kunkoro and Suhajono 2002, if the measurement findings are significantly higher than the target, the bank is unlikely to be facing liquidity problems, and according to Bank Indonesia, FDR figure should be around 78% to 92%. Here is empirical model. For the period 13 months, an empirical examination of the variables of determinants of Sharia bank financial performance was conducted. For the literature gap, in this research, the formula to computing the profitability, which is return on asset ROA of Sharia bank, we use only one version. According to current business textbook, there are 11 different versions of computed return on asset that can be found. Besides, other studies use return on equity ROE, but in our research, we use return on assets ROA. Last but not least, other studies that have been done demonstrate the financial performance of Islamic banking in Indonesia by using the Maqasid al-Shari'ah approach. They use partial least square PLS to evaluate the relationship between the Maqasid al-Shari'ah concept and its indicator and linear regression to prove causality relationship between variables. Conceptual framework. From the figure, as we can see, for the dependent variable is return on asset ROA, meanwhile for the independent variable, capital adequacy ratio, CAR, non-performing financing NPF, operating expenses to operating income BOPO, and also financing to deposit ratio, which is FDR. Here is the econometrics model that was conducted to understand determinants that influence the financial performance of Sharia bank in Indonesia. For the hypothesis, firstly, there is no significant relationship between capital adequacy ratio and return on asset for null hypothesis. For the alternative hypothesis, there is a significant relationship between capital adequacy ratio and return on asset. Next, for null hypothesis, there is no significant relationship between not performing financing and return on asset. Meanwhile, there is a significant relationship between not performing financing ratio and return on assets for alternative hypothesis. For null hypothesis, there is no significant relationship between operating expenses to operating income and return on asset. There is a significant relationship between operating expenses to operating income and return on asset for alternative hypothesis. For null hypothesis, there is no significant relationship between financing to deposit ratio and return on asset. For the alternative hypothesis, there is a significant relationship between financing to deposit ratio and return on assets. Here are the table of data for monthly data from July to December 2018, January to December 2019, and January to December 2020, which means the 13 months of the data used. In this research, the data were analyzed only in Indonesia using the data from the source report of Sharia Bank in Indonesia from official website Financial Service Authority, which is OJK. For descriptive analysis, with the standard deviation of 0.18, the mean value of ROA would be 1.5. The standard deviation ROA is lower than the mean value, which means there is a low variability in the results. In addition, 1.88 and 1.2C are the maximum and minimum values of ROA. The mean value for CAR is 20.49 and the standard deviation is 0.53. For CAR, the maximum and minimum values are 21.64 and 19.56. For NPF, the mean value is 3.45 and the standard deviation is 0.23. The maximum and minimum values are 3.95 and 3.13. The mean value of BOPO is 86.35 while standard deviation is 1.8. The maximum and minimum values of BOPO is 89.36 and 82.78. Last but not least, FDR is observed to have mean at 78.96 and standard deviation at 1.48. The maximum and minimum value for FDR is at 82.01 and 76.36. The skewness, when the data value is negative, it will be skewed to the left, whereas if the value between -3 to 3, it is normal distribution. The result shows that ROA, CAR, NPF, BOPO, and FDR are inclined to the right, and it means that all of them are normal distribution. For Jacobera, the value of Jacobera for ROA is 2.4, CAR 0.31, NPF is 6.35, BOPO is 0.5, and FDR is 0.76. In addition, the significance of the probability level points is 0.5. ROA and NPF have probability values of 0.3 and 0.04 respectively. This shows that they are rejecting the null hypothesis of a normal distribution since the probability values are statistically significant and the distribution are definitely not normal. Meanwhile, CAR, BOPO, and FDR have probability values of 0.86, 0.78, and 0.68 respectively, which indicates that they cannot reject the null hypothesis of a normally distributed curve. For correlation, there was a negative correlation between ROA with CAR, NPF, and BOPO, which are -0.39, -0.24, and -0.83. Meanwhile, FDR showed a positive correlation exists with ROA, which is 0.14. CAR is then found to correlate negatively with the value of -0.39 and -0.37 respectively with the ROA and FDR, but CAR is positively associated with NPF and BOPO, which are 0.13 and 0.15 respectively. Next, NPF is observed to be negative correlation with ROA, which is -0.24, but have positive correlation with CAR, BOPO, and FDR, which are 0.13, 0.55, and 0.17 respectively. BOPO, it has positive correlation with CAR 0.15 and NPF 0.55, but BOPO is negatively associated with ROA, which is -0.83, and also with NPF, which is -0.014. Finally, FDR is observed to have correlated negatively with CAR and BOPO with the value of -0.37 and -0.014 respectively, but correlate positively with ROA 0.14 and NPF 0.17. Ordinary least square OLS. From the result, the R-square indicates a value of 0.8389 that ensures that all independent variables CAR, NPF, BOPO, FDR can be explained by 83.89% of the difference in the dependent variable, which is ROA, and 16.11% unexplained for the remainder. It means that the effect of the R-square represents change in the dependent variable that cannot be clarified by the variation in the independent variable used in the regression. F-statistic. The F-statistic rule has to be more than 4. F-statistic derived for the model test was 32.55. The result indicates the significant amount that is higher than 4, and the model is acceptable. For Darwin-Watson, from this test, the Darwin-Watson is 0.63, and in this analysis, There is autocorrection issue since its value is less than 2. OAS coefficient CAR equal to negative 0.102963 means that increase 1% CAR, ROA decrease 0.102963 and assume another factor is V. Second is NPF equal to 0.270265 means that increase 1% NPF, ROA increase 0.270265 and assume another factor is V. Next, OPO equal to negative 0.098787 means that increase 1% OPO, ROA decrease 0.098787 and assume another factor is V. Last but not least is FDR equal to negative 0.005631 means that increase 1% FDR, ROA decrease 0.005631 and assume another factor is V. For the third objective, which is recommendation to improve financial performance of Sharia bank in Indonesia. The first one is increase net income. There are several strategies to enhance profit, including boosting sales and lowering optional costs. Furthermore, Sharia bank can reduce non-essential running expenses to save money and boost profit. Second is manage assets. The Sharia bank could decrease the total asset to increase return on asset (ROA), while the net profit remains the same. Last but not least, manage investment. The Sharia bank may have investment in other banks in form of associates, financial assets, or other types of investment. This investment will generate return different for their operating activities, so they have to check and compare to the bank return. If they are generating a lower profit compared to the current activities, it means they can increase ROA by getting rid of their investment.
The first piece of recommendation that we have for future researchers is to stay organized. Throughout the data collection process, we will encounter a vast amount of information ranging from web page to PDF to videos. It is critical that we keep all of this information organized in some way to avoid losing something or failing to properly cite something. Future researchers can then add more variables. As we can see, we only use 4 independent variables for this analysis: capital adequate ratio, non-performing financing, operating expenses to operating income, and financing to debt ratio. This research can assist researchers in determining whether it is one of the factor determinant of Sharia bank financial performance. Aside from that, the future researcher can use another method of analysis to accomplish the same thing. It means that they can experiment with different technique and method. It may aid researcher in determining which technique have the potential to have a significant impact on the outcome of the relationship between the two variables by acquiring additional technique. Furthermore, potential study will need to extend the study duration in order to obtain better and more reliable results. As the study only use 30 months of the monthly data as observation, the researcher is encouraged to increase the number of months because the study can be analyzed using the panel co-integration model when many months are used. Following that, future researchers should build on the research finding. This could be related to unexpected finding from our study. Furthermore, we can propose future research to be addressed unanswered questions about our research problem. Our study focused on the Indonesian financial industry during the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically the Sharia bank financial performance during the pandemic. Furthermore, future researchers may address the research limitation. Our research will have limitations which may relate to the formulation of research goal and objective, the use of data collection method, sample size, the scope of discussion, and the analysis. We can make suggestions for future research that address the limitation of our study. In this report, we address the limitation of our research. Lastly, future researchers also have constructing the same research in new context, location, or culture. It is more likely that we address our research problem within the setting of specific context, location, or culture. Accordingly, we can propose future study that can address the same research problem in a different setting, context, location, or culture. In our research, the location of the research was in Indonesia. We can construct the research to other locations such as Malaysia, and we can compare our research between the two locations.
Future research. First, determinants of gold price in Malaysia. Gold has been used as a reserve of value and a way of payment since ancient times. Gold standard was introduced as a monetary system which utilized fixed quantity of gold as the standard economic unit of account. Gold prices have been volatile in recent development. The independent variables that we can use for this research, namely Malaysia's inflation rate, exchange rate, interest rate, and Brent crude oil price is included. Second, the determinant of capital structure. The capital structure puzzle pointing to different and even conflicting views has been vastly debated over the last 5 decades. It was to investigating the determinants of capital structure of public listing companies on Bursa Malaysia, Singapore Stock Exchange, and Thailand Stock Exchange. For this research, we can investigate how firm-specific factors such as claim size, tangibility of assets, and depreciation to total asset along with the macroeconomic factors such as inflation influence the capital structure decision of public listed companies. The third, and investment on the consumption pattern among households during COVID-19 pandemic. Consumer theory attempts to determine the purchasing habits by applying a similar basic human behavior presumption. The price consumption is the consumer consumption choices change when the price of one of the goods changes. Income consumption is a combination of two goods that maximize a consumer satisfaction at different income level. The consumption pattern is the process by which people search, purchase, and consume products to meet all their needs and desires. Consumers are improving and developing new norms.